Welcome onto the program. We're going to get to you the latest right now on this fast-evolving war between Israel and Iran. To do that, a real pleasure to welcome on to Hub Hits Janice Gross Stein, the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs. Janice, great to be in conversation with you.
Great to see you, Roger.
What are you watching today as we enter the fourth day of this war? We're seeing continuing strikes on Israel from Iran, but also seeming signs of increasing Israel dominance over Iranian airspace, targeting various elements of the regime, going beyond security services and the nuclear program to attack Iranian energy sources. Where do you think we are in the so-called escalation curve?
Well, we're on the way up, Rudyard. You are right. As you just said, Israel is broadening the target list. It sent a message that it has a long list of targets, and that has to be alarming. And again, let's just take apart for a second who the audience is in Iran here. Of course, it is the supreme leader, but that is a shorthand way of saying it's the Republican Guard, particularly who stand to lose the most if their assets are destroyed during this fighting. And of course, it's the military who are so important in the economy of Iran, who stand to lose if energy and energy exports are shut down and electricity is destroyed. Already, electricity is very scarce in Iran. There were lots of blackouts before this started. That's really, I think, the bulk of the expanded target list.
Mm-hmm. Janice, what are the Iranian government's options going forward now that Israel has, in a sense, dominance over their airspace, over their capital? Seems to, according to IDF reports, destroyed upwards of 30% of their entire ballistic missile force.
Yeah.
What is Iran running out of options, or is it still too early to make that call?
I think it's early yet, but it's 30% of the missile launchers that they have destroyed, not 30% of the missiles. So, in other words, their capacity to launch, that 30% of that has been destroyed, but their stockpiles of missiles are still there, and there's a long way to go. And as you were saying, the damage, especially in the central part of Israel, is considerable, both from the direct hits and from the shocks of these missile attacks. Is Iran running out of options? Well, there's a very limited option space here, Rudyard. It is fundamentally, and this started 36 hours ago, it is about how Iran goes back to the negotiating table. That's really what it's about. The red line for Iran, and the foreign minister reiterated that, yes, we want to go back to the negotiating table, but we must retain the capacity to enrich. That's the deadlock creating red line here. The Trump administration waffled on this in the beginning. Yes, you can enrich as long as it's for peace. Then pulled back. No, you can't. Then put on the table a proposal for a regional enrichment center, which is quite creative. The Iranians turned that down. So we are already in the stage now of maneuvering about how Iran comes back to the negotiating table.
President Trump is in Kananaskis for meetings with world leaders around the G7. What is your assessment of where the Trump administration is at and how their attitudes possibly have shifted since last Thursday? We know that Donald Trump loves a winner. He likes being on the winning side, and lots of ways this war can still go wrong for Israel, but I think would be a fair assessment to say this first 72 hours plus have gone very much in favor of the Jewish state. It is seemingly Ahead of schedule, again, if you take the IDF reports as correct, they are today 5 to 7 days ahead of where they thought they were going to be at this point in the conflict. How does Trump react to this? He's mercurial. He's hard to predict. Any thoughts? We're not going to hold you to your prediction.
He's made some statements, Rudyard, and with this president, all you can do is listen to what he says. He's clearly evolved. He opposed the strikes, began to change over the weekend. And frankly, it was more than a nod and a wink to Israel to go ahead by the time it did. And he made one interesting statement this morning in which he said, clearly Iran is not winning this war. Now, to take your lead, he likes a winner. And if he begins to sense that the momentum has shifted, then I think the pressure will really ramp up on Iran. And what does that mean, by the way? It means that Israel is going to need resupply very soon. Some supply is already going in, but it will need resupply, especially of interceptors and defensive missiles. That will be forthcoming if the president thinks that Israel is winning. And he also will not join others in putting pressure on the Israelis to stop if he thinks that Iran is losing this war.
Mm-hmm. Anything can happen, Janice, at any time. But right now, stock markets are up, oil prices are down.
That's unbelievable. It's not unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable. The total opposite of what you would think. If you go back a year ago to the first Iranian strike on Israel, that evening the Japanese stock market, plunged 15%. And now equity markets are up, oil is down. Does that affect Trump? We know how sensitive he is to these things. If he feels that there is not a repercussion economically in the way that I'm certainly surprised there's a major war kicking off in the Middle East, and we're not seeing that reflected in energy prices yet, does that make it more likely, Janice, that there could be a desire on the part of the Americans to see this through to an end quickly? And would that seeing through not be B-2 bomber strikes on Fordow and the other Iranian nuclear sites?
Yeah, I mean, clearly you're right to focus, Rudyard, as you are, on the limited, from Trump's perspective, economic downside from this. And when you see those attacks on the energy infrastructure in Iran, and by the way, the electricity system in central Israel is now only partially functional. They don't matter to the consumer markets in the way that the Iranians do. But it's just remarkable that the stock market is discounting all of this. So the big question is, where does Trump draw a red line? Starting from, I don't want any part of this, and I don't want them to do it, to, well, maybe this will help pressure the Iranians back to the table. That's his frame right now, Rudyard. But just think of this. If, in fact, he allows US B-52s to bomb with those deep bunker buster bombs, which Israel does not have, well, that's the end. There is no back to the table. There's no need for any negotiation. So it's a real toss, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Just in our remaining moments, just to widen the lens a bit, when you tend to have these types of conflicts, the real risk is the bigger powers around them who may crowd in, either out of self-interest or to support a proxy. Anything that you're watching there? Because right now it seems obviously that Russia, a traditional ally of Iran, has enough on its plate. In Ukraine, China, similarly an ally of Iran, seems to be sitting this out. Should we, though, be thinking more closely and watching more closely possibly Turkey and how Turkey will react to, if it happens in the coming days, the prospect of a really profound Iranian defeat?
Two things to watch for. One that you've identified right away, Roger. Turkey has already signaled that it is willing to mediate between Iran and the United States in order to make it possible for Iran, frankly, to save face and come back to the negotiating table. There's a long line of mediators lining up to do this work. But Turkey is a next door neighbor, very, considerable interests in this part of the world. But its poisonous relationships with Israel will not help at this moment. There's also a bigger picture here, Rudyard. There's two ways of deep destabilization that could conceivably happen. Who knows how likely they are? Probably not very, but they could. One is for Iran undercover now to race for their nuclear bomb. And you can't rule that out. Mm-hmm. They would not be able to deliver it. It would be very difficult. They couldn't test it, but they could certainly announce it. And that would be a game changer in this. And the second is the regime comes under even greater pressure than it is now from inside the regime, from the Republican guards. And Khamenei does not survive this. I don't mean he's assassinated. I mean his regime falls. Wow. Watch the Turks. Watch the Iraqis. Watch all the regional powers who would have a huge vested interest in any kind of successor regime. There's nothing to say that that would be a peaceful process. There's everything to say that it would not.
Right. Janice Gross Stein of the Munk School of Global Affairs, thank you for coming on Hub Hits today and sharing your analysis and insights.
Pleasure to be with you, Roger, as always.
If you've enjoyed Janice's insights, please head over to the Munk Debates website. You can catch Janice and I each Friday talking about international relations on our show Friday Focus. You can also find that on your favorite podcast app if you're listening to this edition of Hub Hits on the Hubs podcast app. For those of you on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Click on that little notification bell, and we'll send you our next video as soon as it's ready. Thanks for listening and watching. I'm Rudyard Griffiths. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.